The Texas sun beat down like fire, scorching the ground until the dirt itself seemed ready to crack. Heat shimmered in the air, crawling over the wooden fences of the auction yard, where men wiped sweat from their brows and women fanned themselves with worn kerchiefs. The crowd buzzed with restless voices, waiting for the next bid to rise. Horses shifted in their pens, stamping hooves impatiently, the air thick with dust and tension. And then, cutting through the noise, came a voice so raw, so desperate, it silenced everything. "Buy me, rancher. I'll be yours forever." Every head turned. Conversations broke. Even the restless stallion behind the auctioneer paused, ears flicking as though it too had heard the plea. A young woman stood in the dirt, her frame small but unyielding, her shawl slipping from her shoulders as her trembling hands clutched its edges. Dust streaked her cheeks, her lips quivered, yet her eyes, God help her eyes blazed with a fierce kind of courage, and the man she spoke to, Luke Carter, stood frozen, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the yard. Luke wasn't easily rattled. Years of ranching, hardship, and loss had carved him into stone, but those 5 words, they hit him like a gunshot to the chest. His grip tightened on the worn fence rail beneath his hand. His pulse jumped, though his face gave nothing away. The murmurs began almost immediately. Did she say buy her? A girl stop in an auction? What in God's name is going on? No one challenged the order of an auction. Yet here she was. Luke's jaw tightened as he stepped forward, boots grinding into the sun-baked dirt. The crowd instinctively shifted, parting just enough to give him room, whispers trailing after him like dry leaves in the wind. He stopped a few feet from the girl, his eyes sharp, his voice calm but commanding. "What's your name?" For a heartbeat, she hesitated, lips trembling as if speaking aloud would bind her fate. Then, barely above a whisper, she breathed, "Emily." The name carried on the hot wind, sending a ripple through the crowd. Some shook their heads. Others leaned in closer, curiosity burning in their stares. Luke studied her, the cracked shoes, the dirt on her face, the way her hands shook, yet her chin never dropped. She wasn't just a runaway. She was someone burning to escape something unseen, yet too proud to beg for pity. He recognized that fire. Years ago, when he himself had nothing but grit and stubbornness, he had carried the same flame. "Why me?" he asked finally, voice steady, though the weight of the question hung heavy between them. Emily swallowed hard, her gaze locked to his, unwavering despite the tears glimmering in her eyes. "Because you're the only one who looks like you'd keep your word." Her voice cracked, but the steel in it silenced even the boldest gossipers. The words dug into Luke's chest. He had lived by one code his entire life. Say what you mean what you say, and never promise what you can't deliver. He wasn't a man who took in strays. He wasn't a man who played hero. But standing in front of her under the blistering sun, he felt something inside shift. A stir he hadn't felt in years. The stallion behind the auctioneer reared and kicked, demanding attention. But Luke didn't look back. His eyes never left hers. "You don't know what you're asking," he said low, almost a warning. Emily's chin lifted despite the tremor in her voice. "I know enough. I can work. I can cook, clean, whatever you need. I just need—" Her voice faltered, then steadied. "A place where no one will find me." The confession landed like a hammer blow. The crowd leaned in, but Luke heard only her. Trouble, that much was certain, yet in her trembling eyes was something more than fear, hope. fragile, flickering, but alive. And against all reason, Luke found himself wanting to protect it. His hand loosened around the bidding paddle. His decision was forming, heavy and unshakable. The crowd's whispers grew louder, cutting like blades. Emily braced herself, expecting rejection, expecting him to walk away like every other soul before him. But Luke Carter didn't move. Instead, his deep voice broke the silence. Emily. He let her name roll slowly from his tongue. If I take you, there's no running. You stay, you work, you pull your weight. Understand? Her lips parted, breath catching, and then she nodded quickly. Certain, desperate, unafraid. A fleeting shadow of a smile ghosted across his face before disappearing into his usual stoic calm. He turned to the auctioneer, who still stood frozen, gavel in hand, eyes wide. "The horse can wait," Luke said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. His eyes returned to Emily. "This one's mine." The yard erupted with gasps. Women clutched their skirts. Men muttered in disbelief. But Luke didn't hear them. Emily stepped forward, her trembling feet dragging her across the dusty ground until she stood before him. Her eyes shone with disbelief, with gratitude, maybe even trust, and for the first time in what felt like forever, her chest loosened. Someone had caught her. Luke tipped the brim of his hat, his gaze steady as he nodded toward the edge of the yard. "Come on." And as Emily followed him, each step pulling her further from her past, neither realized just how much this choice would alter the rest of their lives. The crowd still buzzed in disbelief behind them, but Luke Carter didn't so much as glance back. With steady strides, he cut through the murmuring onlookers, the young woman trailing behind him. Dust swirled in the heavy Texas air, curling around their boots as they crossed the yard toward his wagon. Emily's shawl clung to her shoulders, her fingers gripping its edges as if it were the only thing tethering her to this world. Her heart raced wildly, half from fear, half from something she couldn't yet name. Each step closer to him felt like a step into the unknown. The wagon sat waiting at the edge of the yard, its wooden frame worn but strong, two bay horses shifting their weight as though restless to leave. Luke reached them first, adjusting the reins with practiced hands, his movement calm, deliberate. Finally he turned, his sharp eyes locking on her. "Get in," he said simply. His tone was firm, but not unkind. Emily hesitated only a heartbeat before obeying, climbing onto the rough wooden seat. The planks creaked beneath her weight, her fingers trembling as she clutched the edge. She didn't dare look back. Whatever waited behind her, whoever she was running from, was finished now. Luke swung up beside her with quiet ease, his broad frame filling the seat. With a flick of his wrist, the reins cracked, and the wagon lurched forward. The horses snorted, eager to move, pulling them away from the noise and judgment of the auction yard. Soon the town fell behind them, swallowed by open prairie. The Texas sky stretched wide and endless above, painted with streaks of fading light. Dust rose from the wheels, catching in the dying sun like gold sparks. Neither spoke at first. The only sound was the steady creak of the wagon and the rhythmic clop of hooves. Emily kept her eyes low, twisting her fingers together in her lap until the skin turned white. The silence pressed heavy on her chest, though it wasn't cruel, just vast, like the man beside her. At last she risked a glance at him. His profile was sharp, chiseled by sun and years of hard living. His jaw was set, his lips pressed in a hard line, and his eyes, hidden beneath the brim of his hat, remained fixed on the horizon. He was unreadable, like a canyon too deep to see the bottom of. This was no man who invited strangers into his life. And yet, he had taken her. Emily's throat tightened. She didn't understand why, but she felt the faint stirrings of hope, fragile as glass, growing inside her chest. Luke could feel her gaze even without looking. His grip on the reins tightened ever so slightly. His mind churned like a storm behind his calm exterior. What the hell had he just done? He didn't take in strays. He didn't drag other people's burdens onto his land. Trouble had a way of finding him even without strangers, and he knew in his gut this girl carried plenty of it. Still, there had been something in her eyes, something that mirrored the fire he once carried, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he hadn't been able to turn away. The silence stretched until Emily, gathering what little courage she had left, spoke softly. "Thank you," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Luke's jaw flexed. Gratitude wasn't something he knew how to handle. He let the words hang in the dry evening air for a moment before answering. "Don't thank me yet." His voice was rough, steady. "Work starts at sunrise. I won't carry dead weight." Emily nodded quickly, clutching her shawl tighter. "I'll work. I don't expect anything for free. I'll pull my share." Her voice cracked, but beneath the fear was steel, a quiet conviction that caught him off guard. Luke gave her a short glance, measuring her words, then returned his eyes to the trail. Almost despite himself, he respected the resolve. The wagon rolled steadily over the dusty ground, the light fading into shades of orange and violet. Emily watched the horizon, her thoughts tangled in fear and fragile hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in months, she wasn't running. And Luke, though silent, felt the shift too. This girl had thrown his simple life into sudden chaos. He knew it already. Whatever road they had just stepped onto, there was no turning back. The sun dipped low, shadows stretching across the prairie, and there, beneath the vast Texas sky, the rancher and the runaway sat side by side in the rattling wagon, bound together by a choice neither could undo. By the time the wagon crested the final rise, the sun was slipping low across the Texas horizon. Golden light poured over the land, painting the grass in shades of amber and shadow. The long field swayed with the evening wind, and in the distance, a weathered barn and a modest ranch house stood steady, their outlines sharp against the fading sky. Emily's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't grand. It wasn't the kind of place she'd once dreamed about as a child, but to her eyes, it looked like freedom, solid ground, a place that didn't move beneath her feet. Luke guided the wagon down the slope, his hand steady on the reins. The horses slowed as they neared the barn, snorting softly in the cooling air. Dust settled behind them as he finally brought the wagon to a stop in front of the ranch house. Without a word, Luke climbed down, his boots landing firm on the packed earth. Emily hesitated for a heartbeat, then followed, her shoes touching the ground as if she were stepping onto sacred land. The air smelled different here, cleaner, touched with hay, leather, and the faint scent of cedar carried from the barn. Luke unhitched the horses with practiced movements, every motion calm and efficient. When he was finished, he glanced toward the house. "Inside," he said simply. Emily's fingers tightened on the edge of her shawl, but she obeyed. The wooden steps creaked beneath her as she climbed, pushing the door open to a home that was quiet, sturdy, and almost too neat. Wooden floors gleamed in the fading light, the furniture simple but well cared for. Everything smelled faintly of soap and cedarwood. For a long moment she stood just inside the doorway, unsure of her place in this silent world. Luke followed her in, closing the door with a soft click that seemed to seal away the noise of the outside world. He set his hat on a hook by the door and nodded down the hall. "Guest room's that way," he said. His voice was even, measured. "You'll sleep there tonight. Tomorrow you'll start with the kitchen. After that, the barn. I don't tolerate laziness, and I don't repeat myself." Emily nodded quickly, her heart pounding. "I understand." Her voice was little more than a whisper, but there was determination in it. Luke studied her for a moment, his sharp gaze weighing her words. Then, with a short nod, he turned away. The night settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. Outside, the land breathed quietly. Crickets chirped in the tall grass, coyotes howled faintly in the distance, and the stars blinked alive one by one in the endless Texas sky. In the small guest room, Emily sat on the edge of a narrow bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The thin blanket lay across her knees, but sleep refused to come. Her mind raced, tangled between fear and a fragile hope she was almost afraid to admit. She had thrown herself at the mercy of a stranger, and impossibly he had caught her. Maybe tomorrow would prove it to be a mistake. Maybe this man would turn her away or worse. But tonight, at least, she wasn't running. Tonight, she had walls around her, a roof above her, and the faint, dizzying feeling that she might have found a place she could belong. On the porch outside, Luke Carter sat in a wooden chair, its boards creaking softly beneath his weight. A cigarette glowed between his fingers as he stared across the darkened fields. The land stretched wide and quiet before him, as it always had. But tonight, the silence felt different. He exhaled slowly, smoke curling into the starlit air. His jaw tightened, his thoughts heavier than the night itself. He didn't know what had possessed him to bring her here. Maybe it was that fire in her eyes, that unyielding spark that reminded him too much of a younger version of himself. Whatever it was, there was no undoing it now. He muttered under his breath, voice rough and low, "What the hell are you doing, Carter?" But he already knew. Inside, Emily finally stretched out on the bed, pulling the thin blanket over her small frame. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but her heart beat with something she hadn't felt in a long time, something dangerously close to safety. And somewhere outside, under the wide and endless Texas stars, Luke Carter sat awake, knowing their lives had just shifted onto a road neither of them could turn back